Hi, everyone. So we're talking about Pluto in Taurus and Pluto in the second house. And today I want to start by talking about what it means when we're talking about Pluto as the bottom line of a person's chart. Pluto represents within evolutionary astrology the soul, and it's going to be the way that we've continually reincarnated. So something that we've kind of grooved into ourselves karmically, a vibration that we've done over and over again. And the reason with that in EA is desire, or something that we've been focusing on. So the house and sign that a person's Pluto is in really speaks to their essence, this quality that they just have so innately within them. So as you get practice reading people's charts, or reading the charts of your friends, people in your family, you can start to feel that kind of deep sense of who that person is by where their Pluto is. And in the second house, that's a very present place for Pluto to be. It's the Earth sign, Earth house of Taurus. It's where from Aries we have this desire to exist, we emerge. And in Taurus, we kind of settle into a form. It's the first fixed sign. And so I think of a bull as the mascot of Taurus. And you have this, bull sitting pleasantly in a field of flowers or something, or you have the bull that's like angry and breathing heavily through its nose. Either one of those images is going to be that kind of gentleness, extreme gentleness, sensuality of Taurus and second house, as well as the kind of built up momentum, the kind of staying power and endurance. As far as the kind of bottom line psychology of a second house Pluto or Pluto in Taurus, which we can get more into, and I also want to mention that this, totally feel free to interrupt with questions at any time or thoughts. I want to have this be a dialogue. Pluto in the second house is one of the most, the word just came to mind, stubborn, but it's also it's fixed, earth. So you get the sense of a groove in the soil that's very, very deep. And so while other Pluto placements may be more quick to change their orientation towards reality, and certainly planets in a person's natal chart and personality can influence, but Pluto in the second house as a vibration is extremely solid where it's at. This might be an orientation to reality that is very fixed in its view. Ari Moshe, who introduced me to evolutionary astrology, called it the frog in a well syndrome, which is where there's a frog at the bottom of a well looking up and it sees that small ring of light and it thinks that that's all there is. Whereas if this frog came out to the top of the well, they would see a whole nother landscape and environment. And so that can apply to how a person looks at their life. It can apply to what they're attached to, whether it's they're viewing all of reality through the filter of a particular relationship, a particular job, a worldview. There's a sense of possibility of stagnation. And at the same time, that kind of focus that's built in Taurus and second house is a lot about cultivation. So there can be a kind of endurance energy to this bottom line psychology. Anything there that anyone wants to ask, or should I keep going?
Sabrina, I just want to say that the archetype of Taurus can also be applied to the South Node and to the North Node.
Yes.
Yep, just for people who are listening in. Okay.
You mean just the South Node of the moon?
Yeah, the South Node of the moon, like the meanings that you're, getting into can also be applied to the South Node and to the North Node in the natal chart. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if, Pluto is going to be how a person has been over and over again, and the South Node often is similarly that, unless a person has a planet squaring the nodes and then their North Node is also something they've developed in the past. A few other things that come up with a second house Pluto or Pluto in Taurus is a love of solitude. This has been a desire to get to know oneself and one's internal values. Taurus in the second house is ruled by Venus. And you also have Libra, who's ruled by Venus. But Taurus is the inner side of Venus. It's our relationship to ourself, which we also would call self-esteem, self-worth. And a person with Pluto in the second house is really on an evolutionary track around self-worth. And so these will be people who have in their vibrational field perhaps an immense sense of self-worth. It's like it's Mercury retrograde. Am I going to trip up over words? There it is. But yeah, an immense sense of self-worth or a lack of it. Taurus also relates to, it's the whole spectrum of scarcity consciousness towards abundance consciousness. And it's going to be speaking to how a person works through that in this life. And it will be mitigated or expressed through what their south node is, what sign, what house, etc. With that, Taurus and second house pares things down to basics and simplicity. So these are people that may have a very clear, distinct taste of what they consider to be valuable. You can have someone who, with this position, really, really values the good life, but how they define that can be different. But you'll still feel that intensity in their field about it. It could be that their sense of wealth is attached to a particular structure that has to do with money and a certain kind of social status, and they might have manifested that to a large degree. Or they might struggle with that and desire it and feel lack. You might have someone who just like lives on the beach or something and eats fruit off of trees and never really made much money, and they do what they love every day and they surf or something like that. That could also be the vibration of second house Pluto. There's a simplicity there. And the intrinsic nature of the second house is finding love in the things that we are rooted in, what we're doing with our body, how we are relating to ourselves. Pluto as an archetype is correlated with Scorpio, and second house is Taurus, which is the opposite of Scorpio. So inherently within Pluto in the second house, you have that kind of paradox where Pluto is going to be about how we share and merge resource, and second house is so very internal. So sometimes people with second house Pluto are very connected to their environment in such a way that they're kind of like part of the earth. And they don't necessarily even have to be so visibly an earthy type of person with like dirt on their hands because they've been gardening all day or something like that. It can be someone who just generally feels like they belong, someone that feels, one trick that a person with second house Pluto told me was that I get like lost sometimes when I'm talking and have to like find my way back, and I'm thinking about second house, which is so much about presence. So this person would plant their feet in the ground and meditate on belonging, like that they just belonged in a space. And there's actually something really profound to that. If it's done earnestly as a meditation, I do think that that can actually alter one's experience with a particular landscape that they're in. This person learned it by being in completely foreign environments, like a new country, not knowing the language, not knowing the people. And to offset, I guess, the sense of anxiety with that, they would just meditate on belonging by planting their feet in the ground, and it would work. So I feel like that is maybe an example of how Pluto in the second house may be used very consciously. There's also the sense of the unconscious being embedded or enmeshed in environment, not being able to get away from it, being so attached to the values of one's environment that one doesn't know who they are, which could also propel the need for this kind of cyclical solitude to get away from it all. Who am I actually, versus who I'm supposed to be, what kind of rewards I get in society or in my family or any of those external things, which for a person who's so connected to their environment, kind of like a tree who has an underground network, communicating with other trees, it's very hard for a second house Pluto to disconnect from their immediate environment. So any kind of internal technology where a person can understand themselves and how they are exchanging energy with the forces around them can help empower second house Pluto to connect and disconnect with more will or more choice versus just kind of being in where they're at. So is there anything I can clarify about that? I would really love to hear from anyone about any kind of second house Pluto questions.
I'll comment.
Yeah.
So I have second house Pluto at the very end. In some house systems, it's in the third, but I really identify with second, and I love having my hands in the dirt. I mean, when you said that, it just made me smile, because that's probably about when I'm the happiest, is when my hands are in the dirt. And I also am a yoga teacher, and one of the meditations that I do when I do grounding poses, or like root chakra poses, is I am safe, I am secure, I'm here, this is where I belong. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing you said about being hard to disconnect from the environment, I thought was very curious, because I do feel like I'm so connected to the environment that it is hard to separate myself from what's going on, so that I do spend a lot of time in solitary because of that, because other things going on, I pick up on other people's energy, but that's an interesting.
Yeah. Speaking of the environment piece of it, I don't have Pluto in the second house, but my moon is opposite Pluto and my moon's in Taurus. And I feel extremely connected to my environment, and it brings up a desire to cultivate environment. For example, like I have different thoughts that come in my head if my room is clean and I have incense lit and I've created like a more Venusian aesthetic for myself. And I can kind of shut that off and, write and be creative just off of willpower or something. But reality shifts drastically for me if I change my environment. And I think at different times it's also been an impetus to the inward process of Pluto in a second house could be to look at what's around them and how they feel and be like, I need to get away from this, or like I need to change something about this. And the particular process of evolution within Pluto in the second house could be very slow in terms of its happening on the earth plane and not necessarily in the mind, which is more electric and quick. And it will take time to plant seeds and to see those seeds grow and to be able to harvest whatever crop has been grown. So I see Pluto in the second house as having a very enduring presence in whatever it is that they are willing into their lives. But the way that they go about it is very methodical or slow or just very earthy. It's the feeling that comes up with it. I've noticed too that there's the quality of stubbornness within the second house Pluto is very interesting, because they the level of their stubbornness will actually attract the polarity of Scorpio, or the polarity of people being like, come on, do something different, and like kind of trying to rile up that second house Pluto and shake them out of their stagnancy. which draws the point that they are connected to their environment, so much so that when they stop moving, the environment's like, hey, you are part of me, like you need to do something. Yet that their reaction to it can dig their heels in even harder, like, no, I'm not going to budge. And the question becomes, is the Pluto in the second house person doing that out of a defense, out of fear? Like, it's like, no, you can't make me move, because Taurus really doesn't like when people push them. Or is it a sense of like truly being in tune with one's value nature, that they're like, no, like this is where I stand and I'm not going to move. And that can be incredibly powerful for the people around them, because oftentimes in other kind of relational encounters, someone makes a request and another person responds to that request of like, oh, okay, I'll adapt to that. And a second house Pluto is going to be very solid and like not moving, which turns the other person kind of back in on themselves of like, oh, why is it that I'm trying to get this person to do this thing? And it can be a very interesting dynamic for that second house Pluto to be interacting with. They can eventually come around, but they will do so in their own sweet time, which is the Taurus way. I like seeing you laugh about this, like you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I am stubborn, and I have had people. I had one boyfriend say, "Sue, just do something, even if it's wrong. Just do something."
Yeah. So this is the consciousness or unconsciousness aspect of Pluto, right? Because you can be very stubborn in a way that there's a chat message here. Oh, it's Wendy saying my sister has Pluto second house and she's very stubborn. Yeah, super stubborn. The reason for this too is it's not necessarily just a personality trait, though it manifests on the personality level. It's a sense of security with familiarity and with what has already been established or cultivated. And so a person who has second house Pluto, it's like trying to uproot a tree. The tree is not going to want that. It's like a fairly dramatic experience to change what is happening within the second house realm. And so gentle, more gardening-like permaculture imagery comes to mind when it comes to creating change within the second house Pluto's reality. And so, however, if they are stagnant and staying in one kind of place, and it's like the frog in the well kind of thing, I do think that certainly like some unconscious, like that can motivate extreme events, the kind of cataclysm that we talk about with Pluto and EA, where something comes up to really shake up that order. And it could, in a sense, be something from their environment that they haven't been paying attention to, or just being like, no, I'm not going to move, but that actually being something that is what propels their extreme experience. Another thing I wanted to talk about with Pluto in the second house is the ability to receive and being receptive. When we think of Taurus, we think of soil and fertility. It's self-love. I've seen different extremes of Pluto in the second house. One person that I met who had that placement was talking about like loving to just like be so uncomfortable, like having to like rough it in the woods with like barely anything to survive, and like that kind of discomfort, him in the elements was what made him feel alive. And I was like, oh, second house Pluto. It's like not needing very much at all. And even to this kind of extreme degree of like, don't give me anything. It can be very, there could be that ascetic kind of aspect to it. And it's also about opening to receiving love, receiving, like Amanda Palmer, who wrote The Art of Asking, which is a book. She's a triple Taurus, and it's about how she learned to ask for help and receive help. Taurus, second house, those are going to be archetypes about self-reliance. And self-reliance doesn't mean that we do everything by ourselves. It can mean that we're also very resourceful and that we get help from places that we value. And to be able to do that requires some kind of psychic work on the second house Pluto person. They might be aware of what kind of strings are attached, and there might be some kind of value judgment on that. When when we do interact with other things, I do think there's always energetic exchanges happening, and there can be an extreme security drive on the part of a second house Pluto to not have those threads occur, even though they do naturally occur. There's a sense of kind of figuring out how that works for that person. The second house, eighth house axis has to do with like the body as a resource. So it could be about like sex work, or like using the body to like, so literal sex work, or like I don't know how to describe it, but that sense of like exchanging like what you intrinsically have as value to get what you need, and how that can cause a certain type of psychology. So people with that axis karmically activated, there's some kind of sense of an internal value that's been built up such that they know that they can use that to exchange something that they want, or that other people want something from them. And I think I'm getting lost trying to describe that because it's such an expansive topic, and it seems it's like everywhere. It's part of human connection, is the exchange of value. And Pluto in the second house, a person is wanting to really discover that value. The polarity point comes with the eighth house, Scorpio, how they're going to share that, how they're going to make exchanges that they feel good about. And also, I don't think sex work is a bad thing, and I just want to put that out there. I don't like, I'm not into judging that at all. So backing up to the opening to receive love and receive guidance or help or support, any of those kind of eighth house Scorpio, it's merging with another person's energy field. One thing that a metaphor just came to mind is like someone wins the lottery. People will be able to kind of maintain the level of wealth that they're accustomed to having. So people who win the lottery, they might have this huge influx of money, and then a year later, they're back to where they started. It's because they didn't have the level of receptivity to hold that great amount of money. They're not thinking with that kind of habitual, I have all this money kind of mind. They're not thinking about investing it, or starting this venture. That's just not part of their landscape of what they've been accustomed to, and they end up back to the level that they, the threshold of wealth, the threshold of receptivity that they're at. People with Pluto in the second house will do this in a lot of areas of life. It's anything around resources, emotional and like physical. So it could be wealth and it could be love. Just like, this is how much I can receive, and that's it. And that will undergo transformation for a Pluto in the second house. It could be from their environment, such as naturally, if a person has been developing their inner world and their inner value for many lifetimes, that's a very magnetic quality. And so they might attract another person who wants to give them all this love. And they're like, I'm not accustomed to this kind of love. So it transforms them. It might also be the desire for survival. I don't even know if I'd mentioned that word yet, but survival is a huge theme with the second house. The whole arc of, money or resources, it really starts at the bottom level with survival, just like being able to have food, being able to have shelter. But that basic kind of archetypal need for those things will expand into like having clothes that you want, or organic special superfoods that you like. You know, it can be any level depending on where a person's at. One of the shadow or difficult elements with Pluto in the second house is what I call, or I've heard, I didn't make this up, an upper ceiling dragon. So there's a sense of, this is as far as I can go. Like, this is all I can have. And when a person, for example, they're really working to make a living, or they're trying to survive, they want to not have to work so hard with their body every day. They want to find a way of like, how can I get ahead, instead of like having to work for someone else. I've heard people with Pluto in the second house, they'll talk about wanting to get like a return for the seeds that they're planting. Like, I don't want to work for someone else and have all my work build a garden in someone else's reality. I want to have that harvest myself too. And so there can be a desire to find out, how can I be self-sufficient? The type of journey that sets a person on is confronting those dragons of like, you know, it seems like everyone really wants love, or like wants more nice things, or like wants to have what it is they desire, but they must be able to receive it. So in terms of even like manifestation or prayer and like that kind of spiritual dialogue and technology, if we're asking to receive something that we don't believe we're worthy of, it's really hard for it to get to us. It may take some time, and we can like work really hard and like hustle and do all these things and like be really gritty about it in some sense. But there's also this like internal kind of magic of just like letting go and opening up and being worthy of receiving. So that can be one of the major resistances that a second house Pluto comes up against, is, am I worthy of receiving this thing that I desire? And they'll find that their inner world is really magical, in the sense that if they make a key shift in terms of opening up to their capacity to receive, their external reality will actually change. Any questions before we go on?
Yes, Sabrina. What about when a second house person receives an inheritance? Suddenly they're catapulted into the 8th house, and I guess they're ready to receive at that point. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. The 8th house, which relates to inheritance, also relates to death. I do think there's a sense that, I think the disenchanted kind of worldview, or the Western mind or whatever, might assume that deaths happen just randomly, like, oh, you never know kind of thing. But when you're an astrologer and you're looking at the star maps of when people pass, or you're looking at reality from that level, there's a certain organic quality in terms of death and rebirth cycles. So I do think that sometimes when people receive inheritances, it's actually very timed, that they were ready for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Anything else?
Hi, Sabrina. I have Pluto in second, but in Leo, ruled by a Gemini sun. So everything you're saying fits, but I don't really resonate with all the slowness so much of the second house.
Because you have Sun in Gemini.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Venus in Gemini.
Yeah, so Pluto and Leo in the second house, I mean, that would be, I guess, you know, it's not just about slowness, it's also about momentum. I think that it can be maybe slow to start or slow to shift directions, but it's the image of like a bull in motion. There's like a lot of momentum and staying power. And so in Leo, that's also a fixed sign about creativity. But if it's been manifested through Gemini, Gemini is the sign that comes after Taurus, and the image of it is like all the mutables shake up what's been solidified in the fixed signs. And Gemini is just very quick as an energy. And so the type of, I guess, repeating vibration that could manifest is more of being able to quickly change or have a certain presence throughout transition. Yeah, so not necessarily always slow. I've known a few Pluto and Libra in the second house as well, who, when it comes to like music, they can play music for hours and hours and just kind of like get hypnotized and like just enjoy the experience so intrinsically. They're the kind of musicians that get lost in their own music, and they're not, it's a group experience. If they're jamming with other people or there's an audience, it's Libra, social, but there's a deep inner enjoyment of it, which I think is a virtue of Pluto in the second house, is their ability to enjoy life so inwardly. It's very, I think it can be inspiring to others, and also part of the attraction that others might have to Pluto in the second house is their sensuality and enjoyment. Which then, brings in the polarity point, 8th house. If there's, I think Pluto in the second is already so much so connected to its polarity point, because it's already combining that paradox. So I'm seeing two different extremes, or like with a spectrum in between. And one is in which the second house, Pluto, has something that they really value or resonate with internally that they haven't developed yet. And so someone on their external environment shows up and has it. And this would be a person that the second house Pluto would really want to be in relationship with or would be intrigued by. Or the second house Pluto person has a certain quality so developed in them that it creates intrigue or jealousy, or like the kind of Scorpio 8th house opposite on the other side, or just desire to connect. And it's interesting because the external reality will shift so much in accordance to one's internal reality, which is second house vibration. A person with second house Pluto might really feel their internal progress by just the cues in their environment. They can see the way that they're connected to it, and that can help them shift and change as they want to. And it could also set up an environment of being just very entrenched in it and being like, well, this is just the way it is, which is another kind of fixed sign thing to do.
Sabrina, I have a question. Could you please comment on zoning out from information or situations that the Taurus person is not attracted to?
Yeah. I think there's a sense of the archetype of the Hermit within Taurus and the second house. And Pluto is about fascination, fixation, desire, all of those things. And so if a person, they're going to zone in on what they are attracted to. And so that could be fixating on what they like. It could also be fixating on what they don't like, which can be a more kind of dark rabbit hole for a person to get stuck inside of. But they might just also have a very strong sense of being repelled by the things that aren't immediately of interest to them, which can be, alienating to others or inspiring to others, because it's an energy of showing other people that you don't have to do things that you don't want to do or don't enjoy, which is, can be a fresh concept to a lot of people. And Pluto in the second house can't help it. Sometimes that's just their nature, is to be attracted to what they're attracted to and not attracted to what they're not attracted to. There's a basic simplicity with the second house and Taurus archetypes, and to have Pluto, the soul, in that space, it just means that they might be the type to, if you invite them somewhere and they don't want to go, they would just say, no, thank you, that doesn't sound fun, like, rather than like making up some kind of nicety around it, which can be startling for other people, and again also educational for others, because it shows them that we have the right to make choices, or to like what we like and not like what we don't like. That desire for simplicity. Yeah, and so as far as the zoning out, I think that Taurus is just a deeply present sign. And so when it's a person who's zoning out from something they're not interested in, I do think they're also paying attention to what they are interested in. I'm not quite sure I picture the second house Pluto. I picture that more with fifth house, and Pluto and Leo is like getting, like the picture getting fuzzy when they don't see it the way that they want to. But maybe there's a similar process happening with Pluto in the second. I'll have to think about that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, is there any other thoughts? Another way that second house Pluto can be inspiring or empowering to other people in their
Is there an issue with hoarding
Yeah.
with this placement?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
it's a shadow. Like, it's hoarding and scarcity are interconnected, because we wouldn't hoard things if we weren't afraid that we were going to be lacking them or that we won't have enough. So it comes from scarcity. I think that one thing we can think of with Taurus sometimes is greed. But I think that greed is kind of a distortion of something else, because there's, a way to explore and enjoy like bliss and like having beautiful things and being in love and having this like sensual kind of paradise. Like, that's not intrinsically greedy. I think it's the sense when people become compulsive around what they consider to be things that they value, and if they're possessive of people or things, that's kind of more of the hoarding. Yeah, and I think it can happen really with any resource. It can be about money, or just anything. Yeah. The other thing I was about to get into saying was that because they're so focused, if they move their focus towards what they truly enjoy, and there's some kind of like truth or realness in it, that they're following their soul and doing what is pleasurable and of value to them, it can counter some things within this paradigm of like the idea of obligatory realities, or doing things we don't really like, or things like that. So these people can be an example of resonant simplicity, or a person really aligning with their internal world. And if they have a good balance with the eighth house, with how they, or Scorpio, with how they're sharing that energy, it can be just a sense of mutual enjoyment, mutual value. So I think that the question of how to integrate the polarity point comes up with empowerment and how to share the wealth that that person has, as well as how to receive resonant or relevant things from others or from their environment that this person is desiring on a soul level, but maybe has some resistance to because of fear or something like that. The Hermit aspect can go to an extreme or be unhealthy in a sense that I think there's on one level like a privatization of life where, you know, it's like, oh, it's that person's MO, they can do what they want. But if we're all connected and if we're all part of this ecology, it would be about listening to how to move a person's like vital life force in engagement with the environment around them, with other people, with where their soul is wanting them to move. The spiritual traditions of kind of isolating from the world, separating. In Pluto and Taurus, it wouldn't be escaping the body necessarily, but it would be going so deep within it or so deep within one's own world that they disconnect from everything else. And I think with Pluto in the second house, it's going to be somewhat cyclical, that these time periods of solitude are necessary for some kind of deeper understanding of who one is. And then at some point, it's the reintegration of how they're going to share that with the reality around them in an empowered way for everyone, which doesn't have anything to do with someone doing what they don't want to do. But in a sense, if they're not budging and there's people around them being like, hey, you should do this, or like, hey, I want this from you, that can kind of like turn the second house Pluto more in on themselves, but also bring up the question on a soul level of like, why is my internal reality out of harmony with this environment? What do I need to do to change that? Is the environment right, so to say? Is there something I need to be paying attention to? Or is there something emerging and developing within me that I need to protect and pay attention to and develop so that I can be in harmony with my environment? And only the second house Pluto person is really going to know.
Sabrina?
Yeah.
Would you please speak about past lives of the Taurus second house Pluto person, past lives being really rich and other lives being really poor, and also perhaps having stooped to dishonest means to make money to satisfy their needs?
Sure. Yeah, here's the element too of 8th house and kind of like, I'll find a way to get what I need and I'll use like the resources at my disposal. So there could be a sense of being jaded about money and about resources, and having seen the way that they come and go, or seen the way that, you know, maybe a person has amassed a lot of wealth and then lost it all, or maybe a person, you know, it's interesting too, the theme of someone who's done that all in one life too, where they've known great riches and they've also known poverty. It changes their orientation to that realm. It can show them the nature of, you know, where that is coming from, which is, you know, what Pluto does is it removes our security and shows us what's more ultimately secure, which is the infinite and source. But it's when that is the vibration, the second house, that a person has experienced betrayal, loss, cataclysm, it's the area that I think, you know, yeah, then there's some kind of addiction or compulsion, like I have to hoard my resources so I don't lose them again, or I have to get my resources from someone dishonestly so I can survive. which can make them be repelled to the things that they desire because of the way that they've had to go against themselves to get it, or go against others to receive it. So I think that it comes back to self-worth at that point, and understanding, this body is a temporal experience. Food is temporal. A lot of food is made up of something that's died. It's like part of the cycle of life. There's this intrinsic kind of, like mana comes to mind, the sense that there's spiritual value in food, or the things that are ephemeral that we interact with. And so a person with second house Pluto, after having experienced both extremes of poverty and wealth, may be looking for a more spiritual orientation to the material realm, so that they can have, just what they need, have enough, have abundance, and not fear loss so much that they try to hoard, as well as not fear loss so much that they won't connect with anything because they know it's going to go away anyway. It's a sense of really dropping into presence with what's in the environment, what's in the field here and now. And so in a sense, I think second house Pluto people feel the heat of living, the heat of Pluto, that kind of intensity in the most basic and simple of things, because of that awareness of the ephemerality of it.
Sabrina, how does the second house Pluto person learn about the values of other people?
The word sex came to mind. 8th house. I think one thing that I was thinking about in terms of this talk is the way that we have our own islands of self, which is kind of the second house, and the 8th house is where we share resources with another person. 7th house Libra is more like, this exchange back and forth, a kind of like conversation. 8th house is the being that two people come together to be. So if a person wants to leave the fortress of their own, grooves of their identity, how they've been so many different incarnations, simply being present with another person's reality is going to shake up that world a lot. Now I forget your original question, Linda.
Yeah, the original question was, how do they learn about other people's values? And you have answered it partly. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and so it doesn't have to be actual like sex, but it's that vibration of intimacy. And I think that truly being present with another person is an exchange of energy. Yeah, and I think second house Pluto's at, many stages of where they're at actually do like doing that. And the opposite side of that is to be just very in one's own world and not really wanting to interact with other people, which is more of the hermit phase. So they might go back and forth between really allowing other people to influence them by just simply being present with them, versus feeling like I can't receive any outside influence and I need to go deeply within and develop my relationship to myself and not talk to anyone. They tend to go back and forth. And I think that there's the, finding the balance there, finding the harmony, the inner harmony of developing a way of relating to the environment in which one has enough solitude or self-awareness to be able to merge energy fields, but not be distracted by it. Is there anything about second house Pluto that anyone has noticed and wants to share? Any questions that seem unresolved?
We have about 7 minutes left. Sorry.
Sabrina, can you say more about what you just said about not merging with other people's energy?
Yeah. because a second house Pluto person, I picture them being so connected to their environment, they're kind of like a tree that is going to just stay where it is. They're connected to the soil, they have roots in that soil, and those roots pick up information. If they don't like their environment, they're literally picking it up in their roots, and it becomes so, it's like all encompassing in that sense. And so unless they have, developed some kind of technique, I think of the, part of Pluto is this snake shedding skins purification process of becoming so deeply self-aware that a person has great free will. Before that happens, there's often a sense of toxicity within the Pluto archetype. So it could be a person with Pluto in the second house, maybe having early life dynamics where they are in an environment that doesn't resonate with them at all. And they're so attached to that environment and its energetic vibrations that they don't see themselves as separate from it. But on a soul level, that like light of the soul is like leading them elsewhere. So it might come in the form of being like depressed or judgmental of their reality or something to that effect. So
Thank you.
yeah, I think I lost my train of thought. I was trying to come back around to what the question was.
Oh, it was just about what you had said about them maintaining their energy while also interacting with others or something.
Yeah. And so I think at a certain point when a person has developed, so much of Pluto is about trust. And so it's an inner sense of trust. If they can feel resourced in their own kind of self-trust and solidity to be able to navigate different energy fields without becoming those energy fields, that's something that a Pluto in the second house person might desire. Simply just because of their sensitivity to the environments that they're in. And the flip side of that too is that they actually, like my friend with the meditation on planting their feet in the ground, they can actually influence the environment. Like we all have that ability. I was reading this, I guess it says like spiritual philosophy, but it was an idea that we perceive reality as being this separate thing from us, and like within that delusion reality can affect us. And this person was arguing that we also can affect reality with our vibration, and that gets rid of that delusion that we're just passively receiving a reality. I don't know how Taurus or Scorpio that is to an extent. It feels a little bit more like Leo's in there of like, yeah, you can create. But it is the sense that the empowerment here would be the arc of going from being so enmeshed in an environment that doesn't resonate with one's values to separating from that, discovering one's values, to emanating those values outwardly so that the environment shifts in accordance and harmony with that person's internal world. So they share some kind of like they composted and like created flowers out of what they were given, and it helps the collective in that sense too.
Sabrina, that was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, we've got about 1 minute left, so we'll have to wind down. And thank you from me. And any final thoughts?
I think, Taurus is also so much about beauty, and second house Taurus, or second house Pluto, I think there's a sense of the soul being very rooted in what is beautiful and like some kind of drive to reach that, as well as the opportunity, or the chance for that person to be at times in life blocked from that or repelled by it. But there's a certain inner guidance or a soul guidance towards what is beautiful to that person, what's just intrinsically valuable or intrinsically pleasurable. and that will be a thing that greatly empowers this person and is also where their fears constellate around.
Brilliant. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. So I've just unmuted everyone and we can say thank you and see you next time, Sabrina. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sabrina. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sabrina.